Welcome to Accessibility 101, Web Accessibility Testing. I'm Thomas Logan, an accessibility consultant from Equal Entry, and a certified professional in web accessibility from the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. Today we're going to talk about when, where, and how to use automated accessibility testing tools, and I'll get into what those tools are in a moment. From there we'll move into manual accessibility testing, how it differs from automated, and when you might want to use it as opposed to the former. We'll also look at some options you have for even more in-depth testing when you're planning out a set of sites, documents, etc. that may need to be tested. We will look at some options that you may have for situations in which the tools that we'll share with you today may not be sufficient to cover everything that you need. When should you use automated accessibility testing tools? What you want to do is immediately start considering them once you've really gotten started. Once you have content or a proof of concept, basically once you have your code, they're going to be very useful in catching what we call the "oh right, I forgot that" types of issues. It's very easy to do, and catching those with an automated tool, it's going to be a lot easier than trying to catch them with an automated tool further down the road, because it will require a lot more work to try to patch it after the fact, rather than during the proof of concept phase. One thing you want to be careful of is not to use placeholders to pass your automated checkers. When we say placeholders, we're referring to things like when you're writing text alternatives for images. For example, you may be tempted to fill in temporary text alternatives such as to do or will add before you have time to go through and write detailed, clear, concise alt text for every image. That's going to be something you want to avoid because it's very easy to do and then forget. And then later you run the checker not remembering you forgot to add alt text, and it looks as if everything is passed. But it may pass, and it will not be accessible because someone using a screen reader won't know the meanings of images that are labeled with to do as their alt text. Another good time to use automated checkers are before you do what's called a broad distribution. If you're about to share a new section of your site internally or externally with a lot of different people, definitely make sure that you've run some automated tools on it just to avoid creating access barriers. Finally, if you don't own an issue, report it to someone who does. That includes noticing an issue on a page or a document for which you may not be the owner of the content. Let the person who is in charge of that know as soon as possible, and the same goes for if you notice an issue with a third-party plugin. It may be that Montgomery County isn't technically responsible for that, but as the host of that item, it will be expected for you to use tools that are accessible, and if they aren't, you'll be expected to let the creators of those tools, the other parties, know that you have detected issues. Let's talk about installing Accessibility Insights, a popular automated testing tool. We download the Accessibility Insights tool first for what you will need for this course. Open the web address accessibilityinsights.io. It's completely free to download. Then activate the Get Accessibility Insights button. Then select which web browser you are using. In my case, I will activate Add to Chrome. Then on the Chrome Web Store, I activate Add to Chrome again. Then I activate Add Extension button. Notice the message Accessibility Insights for Web has been added to Chrome to confirm the tool has been properly installed. For convenience, I suggest you activate the Pen button next to the extension so that it is always visible in your browser. Once it is properly installed, you should see the Accessibility Insights logo, a heart icon with a magnifying glass on top of it, in your browser. The first time you click the extension, you can choose to opt in or out of telemetry to improve the plugin. Congratulations, you have now installed Accessibility Insights and can begin testing any web page for accessibility. On the screen we have 0 failed instances, and that's going to be our goal for when we run this Accessibility Insights test on our page of web content. Now, what is an accessibility rule? After running a FastPass, a series of automated checks are run on the code in the web page. Each failed instance is an example of an accessibility violation that needs to be addressed. Most rules are created from studying documented failure techniques from the World Wide Web Consortium. The W3C makes the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines and publishes a list of techniques that show how web content can meet or fail the technical standard. On the screen is an example of a failure technique numbered F68 which relates to a user interface control not having a programmatically determined name. How accessibility checks work. When a web page loads, HTML, JavaScript, and CSS combine to create a document object model. The DOM contains accessibility relevant information that can be checked for adherence to accessibility rules. Let's say the code on your web page contained this input type equals button. This would fail an accessibility scan. Automated tools can look at that code and see that no code has been provided to label the control. If a label for control is supplied, then automated tools can scan the code and say that the rule has been passed. Where do the fast-passed rules come from? The company DQ open-sourced the rules and put them on GitHub. The open-source nature allows community feedback and improvement. You can suggest improvements to the rules directly. Before the release of Axe Core, many small companies had their own rule sets. This often led to false positives in accessibility testing. A description exists for each rule that is included in the rule set. If you have a question about a rule that you're seeing in Accessibility Insights, you can look on more information from GitHub about that rule and why it's included. This is an example of one of the rules that says that form elements must have labels. It will check the code to look for an example where an input element is used in the code, but may not have a label present. Tools using these rules are Accessibility Insights, Google Lighthouse, and many other tools. So what are false positives? When a rule flags an issue, but it's not a real accessibility problem, developers feel frustrated fixing these non-issues. Wasted developer time will reduce their trust in the tools. At Equal Entry, we had this several years back where a visitor to our site used a different technology to scan our site and tell us that there was an accessibility barrier. No accessibility issue actually existed, but we had to spend time investigating their claim. We decided to write an article about it that you can learn more from if you're curious. Because the web is always changing, code changes daily. New HTML, CSS, and JavaScript features become apparent and available, and they also may need to have new accessibility rules. As these guidelines evolve, the tools must keep up. Different tools use different rule versions. For example, depending on the version of Accessibility Insights or Google Lighthouse, you may be on a different version of these Axe checks that we've been talking about. The important thing to know, though, is that these Axe tools have very few, if none, of the false positives, and that is why we recommend using them as your primary tool for testing with an automated process. Now let's learn how to run a FastPass test and log an accessibility issue. We are going to be on the Montgomery County, Maryland homepage. Here we are inside the Chrome browser on the Montgomery County, Maryland homepage. First, move your mouse cursor to the top right and click on the Accessibility Insights toolbar button. When we click on this button, we see a dialog appears, and there's multiple options of things that we can run from the Launchpad. We're going to run the FastPass, which will allow us to run 3 tests to find the most common accessibility issues in less than 5 minutes. After running the FastPass, we see that we're on the Automated Checks tab. We see there are 25 failed instances of automated checks on the homepage. There's 24 failed instances of a rule called aria-hidden-focus, and there's 1 failed instance of something called link-name. We can click to expand and see more details about this single issue that failed. Here we're able to find more information on a page about what this rule is. We can find out what Web Content Accessibility Guideline success criteria are failing, and we can also find information on how to fix the items. Notice here important items of highlight visible. This lets us see a visual display of where the issue is occurring in our web page. And we also can look for this button here called Copy Failure Details. Both of these could be helpful in assisting someone that we're doing the testing for to figure out how to fix this issue. Going back to the home page and seeing the visual helpers for where the rules are failing, we can look and click on these exclamation point icons to get more details on the rule failing. I've found the single issue for ensure links have discernible text. This is that rule name link name that we're looking at. And here we see a bunch more information that can be used to help someone to go find this issue. Most importantly is copy failure details. We can use this to get something that could be put into an email to notify a developer. Let me give an example of sending an email from Gmail. Let's say the person responsible for the home page is Jane Doe at montgomerycountymd.gov. I recommend putting in the subject line something that will help clarify that you're reporting an accessibility issue. So, accessibility issue, and then write a short summary of the issue. A link on the home page does not have discernible text. Then in the body, we can press Control V or Command V to paste the details from Accessibility Insights into the email. Notice that the details include a hyperlink to the page where we found the issue. This information is very helpful then for the developer to go in and make the modification that's necessary so that we can get to a place where we have 0 failed accessibility issues on the home page. When we click the FastPass button on the page after all accessibility issues have been fixed, we will see failed instances 0 displayed in the Accessibility Insights tool. Now that we've covered automated testing with Accessibility Insights, let's look at manual testing and the tools you can use for web accessibility testing. First, we'll start with your keyboard. Then we'll go over the color contrast analyzer. We'll look at browser accessibility settings, and then we'll touch on testing with actual assistive technologies, such as screen magnifiers, screen readers, and voice dictation. Now let's run a keyboard test on the Montgomery County, Maryland library page. We can access this via FastPass or ad hoc tools, but I'm going to go via FastPass and navigate to the tab stops option. Turn on the visual helper. Recommend then clicking into the address bar first, press the escape key, and then start pressing tab. If you have any issue with running this, you can go back into the Accessibility Insights for Web and click Start Over. That should bring you back into the address bar where you put focus, and you can now press the tab key. As you tab into the main content, I see a purple circle drawn on the screen. This is the skip to main content hyperlink. And now as I press tab again, a line is drawn visually from that skip to main to the next element that gets focused on the page, which is the Montgomery County Public Library's logo. Here I see an extra tab stop at the top of the page. That may be an issue. Sometimes having too many tab stops on the page can be difficult for users because each tab stop takes time. Let's continue moving through the page by pressing the tab key. As I press the tab key, I'm looking for focus to continue moving down the page, left to right, logically through lines of reading on the page. Pressing tab several times, I see that I've moved from the top line of the page down into the nav menu of the page. And I see that focus, starting on tab stop 8, is continuing down across the nav menu of the page logically. Now I can press tab and see that the focus should now move down into that popular at MCPL section of the page. I've moved into story times. And pressing tab several more times, I see that visual shading that creates that panel of content, my keyboard focus stays in that area before pressing tab again and moving to the next panel to the right of the page. So keyboard focus and logical movement, that has a lot to do visually with how the page is laid out, how things are grouped together. We don't want the focus to jump around in a way that would confuse the user. I'll just continue tabbing now all the way down to the bottom of the page. I see there are a few places here where there's more than one tab stop for each article. That's something too we can look at. Again, every tab stop could take the user time for navigating the page, so it's important to think, are all tab stops necessary? Finally, in the footer, see there's a lot of tabs at the bottom, and we do find one last place that looks to be of concern, where we have focus skipping from the branches section over to the support us section, and then back down to the connect section. It's a fairly minor issue, but the logical focus should move from branches down to connect, and then up to support us, and down to translate. This has to do with the visual layout of the page and the logical expectation of the user visually navigating the page. When we get down, we see that in total this page has about 74 tab stops on the page. Here's a sample page to show an easy way that the keyboard focus tracker in Accessibility Insights can really help you quickly log or explain an issue to someone that's responsible for the page when keyboard focus is illogical. Show you here from clicking on Accessibility Insights, we can also go through ad hoc tools and turn on the tab stops option. Here we can click up into the address bar and start tabbing into the page. Here we see that as I tab, the tool is actually helping us by drawing a red circle with an exclamation point to show that logical focus isn't happening. It actually skipped from the email address field over the password and down to the submit button. Then tabbing again, it moves up, so the third tab stop is actually the password button, and the fourth tab stop is the contact us. This circle or this indicator is something that the tool is able to automatically detect there is a keyboard focus issue, but it's not going to be able to automatically fix it. So much like in the FastPass rules, we should be reporting this issue to someone that's responsible for fixing the page. One way is to actually take a screenshot of this page, maybe through using the Windows snipping tool or another screenshot tool that you may have access to in the county. By taking an image, you can clearly explain this page has an illogical focus order. Another part of testing with the keyboard is making sure that you can see where the keyboard focus is. To test this, we just start hitting tab, and I can see there's a blue bounding rectangle around the word purpose. As I tab through the page, I want to make sure that every element that receives the keyboard focus always draws a visual representation of that keyboard focus. Continue moving down the page. All of the hyperlinks are clearly showing a visual keyboard focus. Now it's interesting to get to this page here with the video player embedded on the County Accessibility Portal site. The other part of testing with the keyboard is making sure that actions completely work with the keyboard. So never testing or touching the mouse. What we're doing is only using the keyboard and seeing if we can do everything that someone with the mouse can do with this video player. This video player, first with the mouse, I can show I can play and pause the video. I can navigate to certain times in the video by moving my mouse cursor. I can turn the sound on and off. I can turn subtitles on and off, settings, and many other things. To test that with the keyboard, we again, only using the keyboard, press the tab key, and the space bar or enter key can be used to do that clicking of the play or pause button. I can press the tab key and move into the slider for the timestamp. Using the left arrow keys and the right arrow keys, I'm able to navigate through the timeline of the video. Similarly, pressing the tab key, I can press the space bar to either turn on the sound or turn off the sound. Tabbing to the closed captions or subtitles button, tabbing will either enable those to be displayed or enable those to be turned off. So that's just another big part of testing with the keyboard. We want everything to be in a logical focus order. We want to visually be able to see keyboard focus where it is on the screen with some type of colored bounding rectangle. And we also want to be able to do all of the actions using only the keyboard, never touching the mouse. And this will often be using the space bar, enter key, and escape keys to activate things or close things on the screen. To review, for keyboard testing, we want to ask these questions. Can you tab to all of the actionable elements? Are there any non-actionable elements in the tab order? Can you tab to a group, such as radio buttons, and then use the arrow keys to navigate through items within the group? Can you bypass the navigation bar and skip directly to the main content? Can you see where the focus is at all times? You can use Microsoft Accessibility Insights for the Web Tab Stops feature to aid in this testing, or you can just focus on only using the keyboard and do all of these tests. Now let's talk about testing the color contrast. There's a tool, the Color Contrast Analyzer, or CCA, that's helpful in the design phase and for testing color schemes specifically with color droppers. Now, automated accessibility tools can catch many of the color contrast issues in content, but we want to especially focus on using CCA on areas where we may have colors used to communicate the change of state, or when we have text over a gradient background or text over images. Let's take a look at the Montgomery County homepage. We can see there's a carousel of images of text that is loaded on the homepage. The Leave the Leaves mulch and compost for a healthier yard image is using a purple and yellow color. Let me test the contrast of this using the analyzer. Open the analyzer and place it near the image that you want to test the contrast for. Pick the color dropper for the foreground, and then hover over the font used for the text in the image, and click. This purple color, which has a hex value of A3385B, is now shown in the color contrast analyzer. Now we want to select the color dropper for the background color. Hover over the background color of the image. Because the font color is dark, choose the darkest color that the text is on top of. Here I see I'm going to pick this yellow color. It has a value of FFE890. After picking both colors, I can look at the contrast ratio in the analyzer. It has a value of 5.3 to 1, which is greater than 4.5 to 1, the requirement. We want to check that this passes under contrast minimum AA, both for regular text and for large text. And we see here visually that there's a green checkbox telling us that we passed. Now let's test a different image that is using different colors. Let's test the green color by using the foreground color to select green. And the background color is set to white. Here we can see a contrast ratio of 1.9 to 1. Now depending on what value we set, we might get something slightly different depending on that green. The contrast ratio of 1.8 to 1 fails for both regular text and large text. Now we will talk about browser accessibility settings, zoom, and font size. Here on the screen I'm showing the web browser Chrome and the fact that it's zoomed to 500%. We can do this by pressing Ctrl+ or Command+ to zoom our window to get to 400%. Web Content Accessibility Guidelines require that our pages will work for people at 400% zoom without requiring someone to have to horizontally scroll. We can also have a font size setting in our browser, and here on the screen I'm showing setting the font size to very large. Generally, most browsers now support the adjustment of text size as part of page zoom, and we just want to focus on simply making sure that our page is operating at 400% zoom as part of this test. To do this, we will open the developer tool by right-clicking, selecting Inspect. This view is the developer toolbar, and we can click this button that says Toggle Device Toolbar. Here we can emulate different phones or other devices. You want to select Responsive under Dimensions. Then you want to set the width to 320 pixels and the height to 180 pixels. Ensure this percent is set to 100%. Here we can see now the screen looks very condensed. This is showing the exact settings that are required in the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. What we need to do is make sure we can read all of the information on the page and not have to scroll to the right or left to read text. One thing we have noticed in some audits of county websites is that this button for going back to the top of the page at 400% zoom can sometimes cause an issue for reading at the very bottom of the page. This is something that should be looked at as an example of things that need to work for people that may require working on our county websites at a much higher zoom percentage due to different eye conditions. Let's end this training with focusing on testing with assistive technologies. These tools require specialized training, and they should only be used how individuals with disabilities use their tools. So this means it's very important to understand tools like Dragon Naturally Speaking, Zoom Text, and JAWS are popular tools that people with disabilities use to access government sites. If you are interested in learning more about these specialized trainings, reach out to the Montgomery County Accessibility Team, and more documentation is being made available. Key takeaways. You should run Microsoft's Accessibility Insights for Web FastPass early and often, but always before your final release or publication. You should think through your design content with accessibility in mind. You should put the mouse away. Only use the keyboard for testing. Use the color contrast analyzer to confirm color contrast when color is being used over images or gradients. If you can, test the browser accessibility settings by increasing the zoom of the page that contains your web content. And finally, ask for help when testing with assistive technology. As a reminder, you have many resources available to you: the Montgomery County Web Accessibility Guide, Microsoft's Accessibility Insights for Web, WebAIM's Web Accessibility Evaluation Tool, the CK Editor Accessibility Checker, the Pauciello Group's Color Contrast Analyzer, and WebAIM's Color Contrast Checker. Before you start on a project or as you work on a project, always come here to the MCG Web Accessibility Guidelines and Standard page. This page is kept up to date with policies and procedures, guidelines and standards, and testing tools and processes. Thank you for your attention in today's training, and let us know if you have any questions. We're always seeking to make web accessibility testing easier to understand and easier to complete. Thank you.